Hello everyone and welcome to the studio. It's demo day and today I'm going to give a quick overview of the concept of edges. We'll just do a quick review and then I'm going to do a painting where we are really utilizing the idea of manipulating our edges to create a visual journey for our viewer and also to create a painting that feels natural to the viewer. In other words, how the human eye actually sees things. And I'm going to be talking more about this, but I wanted to do a little exercise. I'm going to address this again, but while I have a chance in the video in person, we can do this exercise together. Now, here's the idea. We want to paint something that looks as though the eye is looking at it. In other words, a human being looking at it. What do I mean by that? Well, if you take a photograph, and especially if you have your camera on the automatic setting, so I'm not talking about when you know how to manipulate depth of field or you're doing editing and you're getting that soft fuzzy background. That's usually after the fact, or if you have the right settings on your camera. So if you're just out there taking general snapshots on automatic, most likely everything's going to be in crisp, sharp focus. So if you're taking a picture of let's just say a bunny rabbit in the grass, that bunny rabbit in the foreground will be in focus, as will the grasses in the distance and the trees in the background when it's on automatic, right? When we're not getting fancy with our camera. But that's not how we see things. What we actually see is one thing in focus at a time. Now, our brain works so quickly that it gives us all this information so that everything appears in focus, right? But if we really slow down our thought process and the way we are looking at something, we will observe that not everything is in crisp focus. Okay, we're going to do a little exercise, but I want you to take this idea and think about how we can apply that to a painting. All right, so you ready? Pick up a pen or pencil, something nearby, or you can just simply use your finger. Now, what I'm going to do, I have a pencil. I'm going to put it directly in front of me. I'm going to lock my elbow. So go ahead and do that. Out in front of you, lock your elbow. Now, I want you to stare at the tip of that pencil or the tip of your finger. Just stare at it so that it becomes in focus. Now I want you to be gradually aware of the surroundings and notice that when the pencil is in focus, everything else is slightly out of focus, right? It's weird, right? We don't realize that that's happening. Now shift your gaze away from the pencil, lock your focus on something else in the room. Now let that get into focus and realize that pencil that was there kind of in the corner of your eye is now out of focus. That's how we see things. Things are not always in crisp, clear focus. It's really only the one thing at a time. Again, our brain's working so quickly we don't even realize this. So how can we use this idea to our advantage when we're painting? Well, that gives us permission to leave things slightly out of focus. A little bit of mystery for the viewer, right? Let the brain fill in the rest of the details. We don't have to spell everything out. What we do want to have is crisp focus where we want the eye to go. These become like eye magnets. And I've talked about how we can create these little eye magnets is usually by the use of contrast of some sort. So a bright color against a dull color, a dark against a light, right? These are ways we can create contrast so your eye is drawn to them. The other way we have to create contrast is through our edges. Now, I do want to say this before I move on about painting things that are all in crisp, clear focus. If you tend towards wanting to paint photorealistic, in other words, copying that photo with all the details, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm talking about when you want to paint a painting that is expressive and painterly and what we would call loose, right? These are the ways we do that is by manipulating our edges. So what I want to do is bring you closer to the easel. I'm going to show you a very quick demonstration of creating edges and talk about them, and then we'll put them to use in our demo. We're going to do some sunflowers today. I'm really excited, so come on closer and we'll get started. Alright, so here's our reference photo today. We're going to have some fun with some sunflowers, and we'll be able to create a variety of edges so that some sunflowers stand out, some kind of will disappear into the background so that we don't have busy sunflowers all over the painting. We're going to leave a little mystery in this painting by manipulating the edges, for one thing. So let's talk about what edges are and what we need to know about them. So an edge is something that happens when one shape meets another. I'll just use blue and purple as an example. So where I'm changing from one color to another, or one shape or another, where those two meet, that's the edge. Now an edge can be soft, can be hard or sharp, it can be lost, it can be lost and found. So let's talk about that. So basically we have hard and soft to start off with. So a soft edge, let's start with the hard. A hard edge is where we can see a distinct boundary. So it almost creates a hard line, right? You can see how hard that is or sharp that is. I read Richard McKinley said something about one of his instructors, said if you can cut it, if it's an object that you can cut like it's a knife, then you want a hard edge or sharp edge. And so this is a sharp edge. Now sometimes though we don't want to see the boundary. Now notice how your eye is drawn to that division of space because of the contrast, right? I'm going to do it another way with the same color so that you can see. So here's hard, or here's one, here's a little bit of a lighter. Well, that's not going to work. I've got to do a different color. I wanted it to be similar. I want to make it a hard edge. So a lot of times if you want a really sharp or hard edge, you might have to go in with the edge of the pastel, or come in and even make a line and then kind of get rid of that line by making various layers. So this is another option, another opportunity for a hard or sharp edge. Sometimes though you want to not see that boundary. We almost not see it because I'm starting to soften it. So a soft edge is where we don't see the boundary anymore. So I could make a soft edge by using a tool to blend, or I could make a soft edge by using the pastel and pulling it up into the other shape. So I'm disguising where that edge is, and now I no longer see where one slips into the other, right? The blue kind of just morphs into the purple, and my eye is not really drawn anywhere in this shape. Watch what happens if I decide I want there to be a harder edge somewhere, like on the edge of this particular shape. Now, notice how I'm drawn to this really sharp edge, hard edge right here, but not where the blue meets the purple because it's softer or fuzzier. Let's soften this edge between the blue and the purple. How might I soften them? Well, I'll do it over here. I can use my finger and just soften it a little bit, or I could take that blue and pull it up into the purple, and then take the purple and pull it down into the blue, and now I have disguised that edge. So now there's a soft edge in between those two colors. So soft edge, we don't look at it, right? We're not drawn to that area. Hard edge, we're drawn right to that area. So we want to use hard edges where we want the viewer to look, soft edges where we just want not to have, well, you don't want to call attention to an area. It's great for when we're doing a background, for example, and we don't want a lot of sharp or hard edges. You'll find many uses for softer edges, but be careful of those hard edges because they will draw the eye. Now, I mentioned something about lost and found edges. So a lost edge is where we don't see what happens to it anymore, right? But a lost and found edge is where we have a hard edge and then it slips away. But then we pick it up somewhere else and then it slips away again, right? So we lose that edge right here. Another way you can do it is if you're drawing a line, and I use this a lot when I'm painting grasses and fence posts and things like that. I have hard edge and then very soft where you can't really see it. It just disappears. Hard edge and then it disappears. So that's lost and found. Found, lost, we don't see the edge, and then we pick it up somewhere else and we see it again. This is a good way to manipulate edges when you want to call attention to areas of something but you don't want the whole thing to feel like it's outlined or sharp. So manipulating your edges, making some soft, make them go away, making some hard by usually pushing a little bit harder, that gives you a sharper edge, is a really great way to manipulate or orchestrate the viewer's eye movement. In other words, where they're going to look. Edges create contrast. Sharp edges against softer areas will create contrast, and that's going to draw your eye. All right, so let's take that knowledge about edges and put it to work with this sunflower painting. So the first thing, and this is going to be just a quick demo, the first thing I'm going to do is just draw in some of these sunflower shapes. And we have, this is like the star. I don't want it right in the middle, but we have one, I kind of like this one that's past its prime here, but then I like how this one is open and sunny. And I'm not drawing every single petal here. I just want this to be kind of a quick response. I like these big leaf shapes here. Here's another nice leaf shape. And what? Oh, the paper that I'm using is UArt, probably 400. I'm not going to do a wet underpainting today, just for the sake of expediency for the demo, but certainly on UArt we could do a wet underpainting, and that would be fun for this. But we're going to just do a dry wash. So there's my composition. For my pastels, and let's show the pastels. This is the same palette of pastels that I'm using for this month's paint along. So if you're a silver member, you will be familiar with this palette. And a lot of times when I am pre-selecting pastels, I will reuse the same pastels from multiple paintings. And when I looked at this tray this morning, I said to myself, you know what, these would be just perfect for this painting. So we're going to go ahead and use the same palette. Again, I will share a photo of those so you can see the different colors that I've selected. I'm going to use the same pastel palette to do my initial block in. Now typically I'll use a harder pastel, but I often get the question, can I use a soft pastel to do an underpainting? And the answer is yes, but you have to use, typically you've got to use a light touch, because you don't want to fill the tooth of the paper, especially, oh, there's another one up here, especially when you are doing a wet underpainting. Look what's happened. See my 4 centers? I can tell in this underpainting that they're too even. So we're gonna have to make a change somehow once we get painting. Let's see, we have some darker leaf shapes here. I'm going strictly with close to the local colors for this painting. We're not, this is not about underpainting. This is about edges, this particular demo. So let's just keep it simple today and not get into color choices for underpainting. That's a totally different subject. Let's see, for my sunflower, I'm going to just use a darkish yellow. Now, what I'm doing, I got to throw another one in here to break up this even thing that's going on. That helps right there. What I'm going to do here, let's get our blue sky, is put a layer of color over the entire painting. And I like how these sunflowers are kind of, you're looking up and they're up in the sky. So there's no ground here. It's just all up in the sky. Kind of cool that way. Throw in a couple more hints of leaf shapes. All right, now what I'm going to do is I am going to throw everything out of focus. Oh, something just told me I needed another one kind of going off the page. Just to kind of show that these flowers are not just confined, that they're all over the place. All right, I'm going to throw everything out of focus by using some pipe insulation foam. You can really use any blending tool, but this works really well. You could also do a wet underpainting. So if you have sanded paper and you have time on your hands, you can easily do this as a wet wash. But my goal here is to blend all of this first layer of pastel, to throw everything out of focus, because we're talking about edges, right? So now when you look at this, what would you call the edges in this entire painting? Let me snap a photo of this. If you said they're all soft edges, then you are correct. These are, I don't know what happened there with my camera. I like to take pictures sometimes of my work in progress, especially underpaintings, because it reminds me a lot of times if I've taken something too far and I wish I didn't, I can look back at the photo and say, oh, okay. Also, taking a picture of a painting at this stage and you look at the photo, a lot of times you can find compositional issues in the photo that are not apparent by looking at the painting, and that's a really good way to check yourself and your composition, because it's much easier to make adjustments at this stage than further along in the painting. Alright, so we have to decide which flowers are going to be the star, and that's going to get the hardest or sharpest edges. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this area the star, and I'm going to move this up just a little bit more. The first thing that I also am going to do is reinforce the dark shapes. So I'm taking a dark blue, I'm putting in some of the stems and some of the leaf shapes with a dark. Like, I can always modify them. I like the shape of this stem here, and that they're kind of multi-pronged. So I'm reinforcing the darks. That's one dark. That's a dark blue. I'm going to take another dark. This is a dark burgundy. And I'm going on top of that one layer of dark. Mostly in the centers of these flowers. I'm using the, let's do one more dark. These are Mount Vision darks. And notice what's happening here. You see when I'm trying to make a mark and I'm getting a mark here and a mark here, but not a nice even mark? That's because it's a new pastel. It's the way it came out of the machine or whatever was however it was formed. It doesn't have a nice even edge. So just rub it on a piece of scrap paper so that you can get that nice even edge, and so that you don't end up with marks that you don't have control over. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little bit more in terms of the green leaf shapes. So I'm going to use I'm going to have that same issue with all of these. This is the first time I've used these Mount Vision darks. If you get a new set and you find that you have a lot of pastels that are giving you that same issue, then just take a few minutes before you start painting and kind of sand them down a little bit, and then you're not fighting the pastels. I'm going to put in these leaf shapes now, because then when I come in with my sky color, I can do some negative painting. Now one thing that I want to have happen is have a lot of these leaf shapes that are, especially the ones that are in the distance, to have softer edges, right? So softer edges, because we don't want to call attention to every edge, right? Because if we have hard edges everywhere, what happens? The eye is not going to know where to look, right? Because it's going to be confusing. There's going to be sharp edges or contrast everywhere, and then we don't really get to enjoy participating in the painting. Let's see. Just add a little bit more of a warmer green on some of the leaves, especially the ones that are in the foreground. And as I'm going to this is just this first layer, but as the painting progresses, I will come back in and make some of these edges a little bit harder or sharper, and then play with the idea of the lost and found edges. Now let's give some, this was going to be my star. I need it a little bit darker. I'm pulling out some of the yellow. One thing you notice with the sunflowers is the petals are a little bit darker. closer to the center. So I'm starting with this brown, reddish brown. Now I'm going to go to the yellow ochre. This is my star flower. So I'm starting it off with soft edges, and I'm not defining the petal shapes. This guy's the droopy past his prime flower. Just pulling some of those. You also get harder edges when you press harder. So when we talk about this idea of touch, and I often say the right touch is a light touch. When I'm using a light touch, what I find is I end up with softer edges. But when I shout, I get a harder edge. So for example, I don't know if you can see this, but right here, that's a hard edge. I made one big swooping mark and I pressed fairly hard. So you can see the division between this color and the reddish brown that was underneath. I like that because it kind of gave me a petal shape and left some of those kind of out of focus. So I'm going to try to leave that alone. Cover that up a little bit more. So I'm keeping things soft, but occasionally I'll press a little bit harder and I'm going to get a harder edge. Some things I want to be out of focus in the background. I want some of these flowers to kind of be hidden behind some of the foliage. I want to move the color around a little bit. So unlike the photo, which doesn't have a lot of flowers, has more sky, I'm putting in some more flowers and then I can decide how many I want to cover up. Let's go ahead and redo some of the sky color that's gotten lost a little bit in the layering process. So I'm just going to go back with those same colors. Now here's another way that you can get lost and found edges. When we do negative painting, for example, if I want to have a hard edge on one part of this flower, I come in with that background blue, the sky, and I just leave it alone. We get a hard edge. If, for example, I come in and very lightly go over the flower right in here, we get a soft edge, right? So here's a hard edge and then it's lost and then it's found again. So this is an example of lost and found edges. And the idea is I don't really pay too much attention to this area, but I do pay more attention to this area where I can see a sharper division of space. Let me straighten that out even a little bit more. So when you're doing your negative painting, when you're coming back in with your sky color, think in terms of creating those edges. Here I can pull out this particular petal by creating a hard edge through the use of the of our background or sky color. I'm going to change to a warmer blue as we get further down into the painting. I'm just breaking up some of the stems and some of the leaf shapes with the sky color. Now I just created a hard edge, so I just took this blue and I went over it very with a firm touch, and that creates a hard edge, so you see that stem kind of stands out. But I don't want this leaf shape to stand out, so I'm going to just come in very lightly, and so now that kind of disappears. So think about your touch, because that's going to help create a variation in your edges. The way you apply the pastel can also create variety in your edges. Alright, so now everything is still sort of out of focus. We need to come in and decide where we really want to add more clarity and detail. And it's at this stage, it's not just about edges, right? We've been talking a lot about edges, but in a painting, we can't just think about edges alone. That's only one part of what makes a painting work. I'm adding a warmer orangey yellow to my sunflowers here. I find that with yellow, I have an easier time with it getting it to be vibrant when I alternate warm and cool. So this is our star flower, so this is where we really want to play up the clarity. Clarity comes with controlling our edges. So I'm softening those edges where they kind of exit the center of the flower. Then where I want you to really see the petal, I'm pressing very hard. And I get a nice sharp edge here. So I really want to see some of these petals here. So I'm pressing hard and I'm paying attention to how that edge kind of meets the next shape and decide where I need it to be harder and where I need it to be softer. I'm going to add some of this color up to this. When I'm painting flowers, whether they're up close and personal like this kind of is, or whether it's a field of flowers, but especially up close and personal, I don't want hard edges everywhere. So in other words, I don't want the viewer to be able to see every flower in crisp, clear detail. Oops. So some I'm going to leave soft, kind of out of focus, and some I'm going to be creating the hard edges, but I'm going to create hard edges all around the painting so that I am creating a visual journey or movement for the eye. So I just came in and sharpened some of the edges on this little flower that's down here because I want your eye to catch here, catch this one, and then still enjoy the rest of the painting. So I need to have a few harder edge over in this area. And then what about this? We don't want the viewer to totally lose sight of the fact that there are more flowers. So I'll make some harder edges in more than one place, but I think carefully about where I put those edges because I'm trying to, again, have the eye move around the painting. Now, over on the outer edges of the painting, they can be soft and out of focus because I don't really need you to look there. So it's just a matter of going in and refining those edges at this point. Sometimes I'll come back in with our background color, which in this case is a sky, and kind of pull out some of the shapes a little bit more. Now, we have some sunlight happening here. Let's talk about that. So the sun seems to be coming from the upper right-hand side, illuminating these petals that are on the right. So we need to do the same with our foliage, right? So the edges of the stems are going to catch some light. So the edges of some of the leaf shapes are going to catch some light, so I'm going to paint them with a warmer yellow-green, not a lighter green, to create that illusion of sunlight. I'm going to add a little bit of that green into the center of the flower. Now, what if I wanted to have a flower that we could, or excuse me, a leaf that we could actually see some of the veins, right? So that's going to be harder edges. And I'm actually going to just draw in some of these veins on this particular flower or leaf. Oops. But I don't want detail everywhere, right? Because if we have hard edges everywhere, what's going to happen? The viewer is not going to know where to look. All right, I'm at the stage of the painting where I'm going to step back for just a minute, kind of evaluate things, and then I'll come back and give it a finish. All right, in stepping back, I realized that I wanted a little more variation in the color blue, the blue sky. So, I took out my Sennelier half sticks that I like to use for finishing. So this is a set that I have come to really embrace because it works great for those finishing marks, and especially nice when I want to get some hard edges because I can get a really soft, or excuse me, really thicker quality to my mark making. So I didn't like that this stem kind of went all the way down, so I wanted to disguise it just a little bit. It just kind of drew the eye right down out of the page. One thing that I can, is still doing it, so I can kind of soften right where it exits so we don't have that line. But I also can perhaps cover it by adding another petal shape, just to break up that. And I like this color too. Going to reinforce that color. Now here's where I have to decide, all right, how much more detail do I want to put in the other flowers, and then how much more do I need to put in this center flower? So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the center flower. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the center a little bit more. It got a little bit lost. And by adding a darker color against that lighter, brighter yellow, we are also creating contrast. Oops. We lost the kind of ending mark for that particular petal. We don't want every petal to be in focus, but we could use a few more. Same with over here. And this guy here is kind of sad. Well, he's sad anyways. And can your flowers be sad? I'm gonna, I just made a hard edge. He's droopy, that's right. I made a hard edge, oops, we don't want a hard edge there, along the side of the stem, so that helps draw the eye to my star flower. Yeah, I'm going to leave all those alone for now. This is the tricky part, because sometimes something comes over us when we're doing the finishing marks on our paintings, and we feel like we need to put stuff everywhere. And that's the whole idea of manipulating the edges. We have to sometimes step back frequently when we get to this stage of our painting and decide, all right, just how much detail do I need to put everywhere? And a lot of times we just have to stop ourselves. I do feel like our droopy guy needs a little bit more interest, but keep it fairly soft. It's real easy with these super soft pastels to get those nice hard edges. Okay. Let's add a little bit more light back into the stems with this nice softer pastel. I can get some hard edges. Let's do one with a soft edge, right? So we're just going to press lighter. So one easy way to remember how can I manipulate my edges is, oh, I'm going to do something over here, is by virtue of our touch. A lighter touch is going to give you softer edges. But when we really want to shout, we'll get a harder edge. I'm going to add some cooler blue-greens to some of these distant leaf shapes. I'm actually going to make the... I don't typically like a hard edge all the way to the edge of a painting. Look what happens. It just kind of pulls our eye right off the page. But if I just take a finger and soften it where it exits, it kind of leads us in, but then we don't go out. We want to pull the eye in and not out. So we're always trying to think about those hard edges, and having a hard edge all the way to the edge of a painting can potentially pull the viewer's eye out of the painting. Let's do another one over here. Soft and then hard. So we can kind of lose that edge, find it, lose it again, and have the ability to move the eye around the painting a little bit. Something told me to pick up turquoise. Ooh. I'll add a little bit of turquoise to some of our leaf shapes just to move that color around just a little bit more. And then we're going to end with a really intense yellow-green, just for some spices. And I'm going to take the additional step here. Another way we can create hard and soft edges is with our bamboo skewer. Let me get a sharp one here. And I'm going to come in and rather than draw lines, I'm going to subtract by dragging through all these layers of pastel. So I can get some more interest in the petals as well by scraping through. Those scrape marks, though, they make hard edges, so think about where you put them. You don't want to outline everything because you're going to get, I think we need another hard edge down in here, so instead of drawing it in, I'm just removing pastel to create that harder edge. A little bit more up in here. And then another fun thing for sunflowers is to just come in with a hard pastel and create a few dots just to give those centers a little bit more interest. This is blue, so this is taking the background color and pulling it into our subject, getting that earth sky connection. You can also use a hard pastel if you want to soften some edges, so just drag it through some of the harder edges and it kind of disrupts them, and then we can get lost and found edges that way. So using a hard pastel as a blending tool can also be a good way to help you manipulate your edges. I like that turquoise there, but I want to tone it down a little bit so it's a little bit more subtle. And I think I'm going to stop. So I hope you've enjoyed this little demo, this little discussion on edges and the importance of paying attention to the edges and manipulating them so that it helps lead the viewer throughout your painting is a key to having a successful painting. So we don't talk about edges very often, but it is one of the key things that we can do to create a better visual journey for our viewer. So I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration, and let's go paint.